What if the Middle East looked different? Towards the end of World War I, US President Woodrow Wilson and his administration were involved in discussions about a post-war organization of the Ottoman Empire's territories, which at this point were reduced to Anatolia in the Middle East. These ideas were part of a broader diplomatic discussion at the Paris Peace Conference, often reflecting a mix of Wilson's idealistic self-determination principle, as per his famous 14 points, and the strategic interests of the Allied powers. These interests didn't always align. The famous secret Sykes-Picot Agreement between the French and the English divided the lands of the Ottomans among themselves, but the Americans at the time, especially President Wilson, had other ideas. It was specifically stated in point 12 of his speech, in which he said, "The Turkish portion of the present Ottoman Empire should be assured a secure sovereignty, but the other nationalities which are now under Ottoman rule should be assured an undoubted security of life and an absolutely unmolested opportunity of autonomous development, and the Dardanelles should be permanently opened as a free passage to the ships and commerce of all nations under international guarantees." Wilson wanted a redesign of the Middle East's borders, not according to the interests of the Allied powers, especially those of France and the United Kingdom, but according to the interests of the locals, along lines of ethnicity and nationality, or maybe even religion. Although Wilson didn't officially propose a concrete blueprint for all of these potential new political entities, there were movements where he or his advisors or groups inspired by his ideas supported proposals involving those potential states or mandates. And he did have a direct input on the actual ideal borders of at least two of them, Armenia and Kurdistan. Here's a map signed by him of those two. In total, there were at least 10 new countries that would have emerged should Wilson's ideals have been followed: a League of Nations mandate over the Dardanelles Strait controlling the city of Constantinople, an independent Smyrna on the west coast of Anatolia, a new Turkish republic, much more reduced in size, a Pontus republic on the Black Sea coast, a greater Armenia that would stretch into modern Turkey and Azerbaijan, a free Kurdistan in Anatolia, Iraq, and Syria, a narrower Iraq which would absorb Kuwait and be known as Mesopotamia, potentially under a British mandate, similarly to Syria, which would absorb Transjordan and be along with Lebanon under French rule. Cyprus, Palestine, and Egypt would be semi-sovereign, but with British influence as well as a fully united peninsula of Arabia, where all Arab people could have their sovereignty. Now, imagine that this succeeded and all of these new countries were created. My first instinct would be to go and visit all of them. Maybe take a walk through Greater Armenia or free independent Kurdistan. Maybe visit the city of Smyrna for a weekend walk. And if I did that, I would need some pretty good shoes to do it with, which brings us to the sponsor of today's video, Vessi. It's pretty warm where I live, and Vessi's shoes are perfect for every climate because not only are they light and super mobile, but they're also perfect for unpredictable weather, like being waterproof, so if it starts to rain, you will be fine on your walk. They were nice enough to send me a couple of pairs, and I've been wearing them non-stop ever since because of how comfortable they are. Also, check out how cool they look. This version in all black especially. I move around a lot during weekdays, from walking my dog, by the way the cutest dog in the world, socks, to running errands like going to the grocery store or going to a coffee run to fuel all of this video making. And Vessi is the perfect partner for those walks. The fact that they're a slip-on makes it so simple to put them on and take them off because we live in a shoe-free house, but not a socks-free house. At the same time, Vessi is the perfect partner for longer walks too. Ever since finding out about Vessi, I'm a huge fan of them, and now I'm happy to be a partner of the brand too. If you want to make your life a little easier by having the perfect shoes to walk in, visit vessi.com/GK for 15% off your first pair at checkout and start exploring the world with extra confidence. Now, let's get back to the video. Now, as we know, the Middle East changed a lot after World War I, but it didn't end up looking like this. To be fair, it also didn't look how the British and French idealized it in the Sykes-Picot Agreement, nor in the later Treaty of Sèvres, which would have brought Wilson's desires a little closer with an expanded Armenia, an independent Smyrna and Kurdistan, and an expansion of Greece along with free passage along the straits. What did happen was a de facto French annexation of Syria and Lebanon, and a British one of Palestine, Jordan, and Iraq, along different more straight-line borders made by some colonial officer with a ruler that took no heed to the ethnic and religious reality on the ground. Turkey kept the Dardanelles and prevented the independence of Armenia, Kurdistan, Smyrna, and Pontus by successfully fighting and winning their war of independence, led by the founding father of the Turkish Republic, Kemal Atatürk. Now, I'm a big fan of alternative history, especially when it's connected to something that could have happened in history had things gone just slightly differently. So in this video, we're going to learn about each of these proposed states, understand why they were proposed in the first place, what they were all about, how things would be different in the region if they existed today, and why they ended up not existing. Let us start with the Straits region. Constantinople, or Istanbul, has always been a key location. It controls the pathway between the Middle East and Europe, it controls the access of Ukraine, southern Russia, and the Caucasus to the Mediterranean, and it connects it with the Black Sea, plus the other way around too. This made it, of course, a focal point for Allied and international interest, enough that Wilson included it in its 12-point. President Wilson's 14 points really emphasized the need for these waterways to remain open to all nations, suggesting their internationalization to ensure free navigation. The idea was to place the straits under an international mandate, possibly administered by the League of Nations, to prevent any single nation from controlling this crucial passage. However, the plan faced opposition from Turkish nationalists who viewed it as an infringement of their sovereignty. Ultimately, while the Treaty of Sèvres proposed international control, the subsequent Turkish War of Independence and the resulting Treaty of Lausanne in 1923 resulted in Turkey retaining sovereignty over the straits, although keeping certain provisions ensuring freedom of passage, so at least a little bit of their goal was achieved. Then we have one that was super interesting to me when researching for this video, which is Smyrna. The city of Smyrna, modern-day Izmir, had a significant Greek population and was of economic and strategic importance. Greek claims, supported by the Allied powers, aimed to incorporate Smyrna into Greece, aligning with Wilson's principle of self-determination, or achieve independence as its own sort of city-state. During the Paris Peace Conference, discussions centered on the future of Smyrna existed. The Greek occupation in 1919, sanctioned by the Allies, however, led to increased tensions, and eventually the Greco-Turkish War. The conflict culminated in the recapture of Smyrna by the Turkish forces in 1922. The subsequent population exchange between Greece and Turkey, formalized in the Treaty of Lausanne, led to the relocation of Greek population from Asia Minor to Greece and vice versa for the Turkish populations. Hundreds of thousands, if not millions, of people went from one side of the Aegean Sea to the other in what is likely one of the biggest population transfers in history. The idea of an independent Smyrna was thus rendered moot by the realities of war and those population transfers. Another super interesting one would have been the Republic of Pontus, a would-be Greek state in the southern shores of the Black Sea. Greek colonies were established on the Pontus coast in as early as 800 BC, and by the time of the conquests of Alexander the Great, the local inhabitants were already heavily Hellenized. International societies of Pontic Greeks became connected with the Pontus Society and began significantly lobbying and pushing efforts for an independent Pontic Greek state. Because of the result of World War I, this was also discussed at the Paris Peace Conference, but the Greek government of Eleftherios Venizelos feared the precarious position of such a state, and so it was included instead in the larger proposed state of Wilsonian Armenia. It's odd, right, that the Greeks themselves were against it, thinking that it would be too vulnerable to exist and too far away for them to help. Ultimately, however, neither state came into existence, and the Pontic Greek population was expelled from Turkey after 1922 and resettled either in Greek Macedonia or, surprisingly, across the Black Sea in the Soviet Union. And now it makes sense to move on to precisely, maybe the reason why many of you clicked on the video, the story of Greater Armenia, or as many came to know it, Wilsonian Armenia. Historically, Armenia has occupied much more territory than it does today, and in the aftermath of the Armenian genocide, there was a push to establish a secure and independent Armenian state. After World War I, there was a perfect opportunity for this to happen. President Wilson was tasked with delineating its borders, resulting in the concept of Wilsonian Armenia. Despite Wilson's support, the United States Senate rejected the mandate for Armenia in 1920. The outbreak of the Turkish War of Independence led to the Ottoman Empire not ratifying the Treaty of Sèvres and retaining control over these regions, defeating Armenian troops and further suppressing the idea of Armenian independence. The other big one is Kurdistan, the eternal non-country. The Kurdish people, an Indo-Iranian ethnic group inhabiting mountainous regions across eastern Anatolia, northern Mesopotamia, and western Persia, had long maintained distinct linguistic and cultural traditions. Their aspirations for autonomy or independence were also acknowledged in that Treaty of Sèvres, which allowed for a potential Kurdish referendum in parts of southeastern Anatolia to decide whether to form an independent state. Historically, the Kurdish regions had enjoyed periods of semi-autonomy under the Ottomans through local tribal leaders and emirates. During the Paris Peace Conference, some Kurdish representatives proposed a state that included parts of what is now Turkey, Iraq, Syria, and Iran. However, allied interests in Kurdistan were minimal compared to other mandates, and internal divisions among Kurdish leaders, coupled with external opposition, particularly from the Turks and later the Iraqis too, undermined its feasibility. Ultimately, the Treaty of Lausanne made no mention of Kurdish autonomy or independence. Then Mesopotamia, which was created as Iraq under a British mandate, but quite differently than the Americans, or at least Wilson, had envisioned. The League of Nations formalized the agreement by granting Britain a mandate over Mesopotamia with the intent of guiding the territory towards eventual independence. However, the imposition of foreign rule was met with resistance from the local population, culminating in the 1920 Iraqi revolt. In response to the unrest, Britain sought to establish a more acceptable form of governance by installing Faisal I, a member of the Hashemite dynasty, as the king of Iraq. And in 1921, this happened. By 1932, they achieved full independence. It also had slightly different borders than initially planned, due to reasons I couldn't really figure out. Maybe because the British also came to be in control of Transjordan, and so they wanted to connect the two territories. The same could be said for Syria, placed under a French mandate in 1920, despite earlier promises of independence made to Arab leaders during World War I. The French also came to control Lebanon. And Palestine was one of the few that went to plan, becoming a British mandate with the same planned borders, as well as Cyprus and Egypt, where nothing changed. And finally, Arabia. Not only was it according to Wilson's ideals, but the British themselves had promised Hussein bin Ali, the Sharif of Mecca, an independent Arab state, in exchange for his support against the Ottoman Empire. After the war, the Arabian Peninsula was fragmented with various tribal and regional powers. The British supported different leaders in different regions depending on their own interest, rather than following the initial plan. This led to the establishment of several states right after the war. However, most of the Arabian Peninsula fell to Ibn Saud, who created the Kingdom of Saudi Arabia in 1932, while other states remained or came to be independent in the east and south. So, those are the proposed countries that would have existed in the Middle East had President Wilson of the US gotten his way. What do you think about this? Would you have liked to see any of these countries be created, or do you think it was good that they ended up not existing? Let me know in the comments. Thank you so much for watching this video. Thank you to my patrons for their direct support, and I will see you next time for more general knowledge. Today's Moomin Cup is another repeat, but it's one of my favorites. It is the Misunderstood Monster. Just the name that I've given it myself. And he has a little cool lamp, and they're just hanging out. Looks a little scary, but I don't think he is. I think he's a nice guy. Sometimes people are nice guys, even though they look scary.